all been waiting for. We're actually going to do some React. This is pretty fun. So I've got up here, this is our lesson using React, and this is kind of showing how can we use React with pure JavaScript, okay? So let's create our own project using React with pure JavaScript. So I'll just open up my terminal here. Oops. Make it a little bigger. Okay, go to stacks, learn. All right, and let's just make a file here. So I'm just going to say touch react intro.html. And let's use code to open that file. Oops. Okay, so we've got our React intro. Oh, why am I? Let me just bring this over here somewhere. Okay, cool. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to create a basic HTML file. So let's just do this to get some stuff in there. Let me make it bigger for you. And then I'll collapse this sidebar here. Whoa. Hey, give me some brightness on that.
Okay, sorry, I didn't know about this.
Yeah, you guys can see okay now? Is anyone having trouble with this?
It's a little bright, but white on white. Yeah, the light is like
white on white? Is there a glare or something?
no, these lights are like well into a refrigerator.
Oh.
You sound red?
You guys just have to hold down the down position to make it go down. All right. Okay, fair enough. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to bring in these scripts. Okay? You guys will notice here I'm including a couple scripts. One of them is called react.development.js. Whoa. And then we have react-dom.development.js. Okay? So here, let's just grab these two scripts. I'm going to copy. Oh, I can use my copy thing here. Go back to our editor and let's paste these guys in. All right. Now inside of our body, what we're going to need to have is we're going to have some sort of a div to mount this whole thing to. Okay. So I'm just going to create a div. And
supposed to be inside the head.
The scripts?
Yes.
Yeah, I can move them somewhere else if I want. So I can bring these guys down here. Does anybody know what the difference is if I take these down here?
It loads up at the end of the page load.
So it actually reads this stuff in order, which means that we'll make sure that we have this div loaded first, right? Before these scripts are even pulled in. All right. That's cool. Now let's say I want to have some code down in here. Some JavaScript. Okay? And what we want to do is we want to create an element using React's way of doing it. Now, how did we do that when we were just doing vanilla JavaScript? You guys remember? No, not get element by ID. That's actually getting a reference to a specific element, right? Create element, right? Well, lo and behold, React has a very similar construct. It's react.createElement, okay? So I can say, I'm just going to create an element here, const h1 equals react.createElement, okay? And when we create an element, we have to say what kind of element it is. So if I wanted to create an h1 tag, which is what I'm going to do, I can just put the string h1 inside here. Okay. The second argument that we need to provide is, as you can see, it says the options, the element options. So this is essentially an object that has some different things that we want to know about our element. Now in this case, this is going to be a very simple h1 tag, so I'm not going to put anything in here. You could just put null if you want. Okay. Now the third argument is kind of interesting. The third argument is this thing called children. And what that means is, what do I want to be inside my h1 tag? Right? How were we specifying things inside tags before when we were using just vanilla JavaScript? Anybody remember how I got some text inside that button? I was using inner text, right? I would say inner text equals whatever it was. There's also another thing that you could specify using vanilla JavaScript. I could say inner HTML equals some HTML, okay? So that's kind of like what this children thing is what do I want to be inside this element? Now it doesn't just have to be text, it could also be some kind of HTML. All right. So here I'm just going to put some text inside there. I'm going to say hello world from React. Okay. Now ask yourselves, does this put that on the page just yet? No. Why not? Yeah, we have to render this, right? In much the same way that when we created our vanilla JavaScript stuff, we actually had to mount it to some certain spot on the page, right? And it's the same thing here. So we've also loaded up this second package, React-DOM. This is the thing that's going to allow us to actually render this element that we've just created onto the page. All right? So let's say React-DOM.render. Okay? And the first argument of render is, what do I want to render? Well, in this case, I just want to render this h1 tag, right? That's it. And the second argument that we need to provide is, what element are we mounting this thing to? Okay? So how am I going to grab a reference to that? I have this element that I created on our page right there, right? How am I going to get a reference to this div right here? That's all I want to do right now. Okay, yeah, I can do it like that, right? I can say document.get elements by ID. Okay? And then I can just pass in that app, right? Cool. Now there is another way that I can get the selector as well. Just show you guys real quick. So if I comment that out, I can say document.query selector, and I can pass in the # and app. Does this look familiar? Looks like jQuery, doesn't it? Yeah, this is one of those cases where what jQuery was doing seems to have influenced JavaScript development, which sort of seems backwards, right? Because jQuery was built on top of JavaScript. All right, so either one of these should work. Let's save this file, and then let me just open it up in the browser. Open, where am I? React intro. Cool. So we're actually getting this HTML on the page, right? All right. Does this look like super friendly to use for you guys, though? So if I wanted to nest something inside my h1 tag, let's see how that might work. So let's say I'll create a div. So I'll say const my div. Actually, let me bring this down here. Move that up. So I'm going to say react.createElement. This will be a div. Right? I don't really need to have any special properties here. So I want to nest that h1 inside here, which means that I can put it as a child. So I could put my h1 in here. Okay, and now instead of rendering my my h1, let's render my div, because that's sort of the parent element now, right? Let's do that. Okay, so we're still getting the same thing, but if we were to inspect the HTML here, we would see that yes, in fact, there is this surrounding div, and then I've got that h1 as a child, right? So there's our code. Let's quickly read through this and make sure we get what's going on here. Io, what's happening on line 12, right? 13, sorry.
You're creating a variable h1,
Mm-hmm.
and you're setting it to be an element that you created.
Good.
And the tag type is h1.
Mhm.
The null is a prop.
So this is like, yeah, this is like our options object, but I'm saying we don't really have any options here.
And then that's the text that's going to be.
So that's whatever is going to be inside this h1 tag, right? It wouldn't have to just be a string, but in this case, we did make it just a string. Okay,
So
yes.
where it says null, is that like where you would put things like class name and other things like that?
Yeah, we could put some props inside there. And we'll talk about props once we get to the JSX part where it's a little bit more friendly to look at. All right, cool. And then on line 15, Baxter, what's happening there?
On line 15, we are creating a const called myDiv, and we're creating the element of our div.
Mm-hmm.
And secondly, I guess that's where we're going to put in our props.
Mm-hmm.
The h1 as well.
Yeah, so we don't have any props. So the h1 is saying we want that h1 to be a child of my div, okay? Which means that it's going to be inside that div tag. Good. On line 17, Hutan, what's going on there?
We are rendering my div variable, which has div and h1 in it.
Okay. And where are we rendering it?
Inside
Inside the what?
inside the React.
Well, look at what arguments we're calling render with. What's the second argument that we gave it? First argument is my div. What's the second argument?
h1.
Line by line. Look, this is the first argument that I'm passing to the rendered function, right? The second argument's down here because I've commented this out.
Oh, I thought you were just talking about the document. The document get element by ID. Is that the second thing is rendering?
Well, this one's commented out, so I was just doing it this way. They both essentially do the same thing. Yeah. So what we're doing is we're specifying, let's go grab a reference to this particular div because this is where we want to mount our application, all right? And our application is super simple. Obviously, it just had those two elements inside of it. No big deal. All right. Does this seem like fun to work with this, though?
Yeah.
Yeah, does somebody likes this? You do?
It's too
I mean,
much
like,
work
yeah.
for nothing.
Yeah, it's very kind of verbose, right? We're doing everything in JavaScript, and it's almost like, well, we've already been able to do things in JavaScript, so this isn't too terribly exciting. So instead, we're going to shift our sights to this other thing, which is called JSX. It's a different way to write React. Now, ultimately, what I want to point out to you guys, and the reason I showed you this, is that all the JSX that we're going to write will be boiled down to things like this. This is the only thing that our browsers are going to be able to understand is this kind of code, okay? But we'll be able to write it in a way that's way more friendly, that looks a lot more like the HTML that you guys have become familiar with. All right. Any questions about this before we move on to JSX? No? All right. So let me clear out of here. We're going to create a brand new project using this library called Create React App. Okay? So to do that, I need to say npx create React app. And this is, of course, assuming that you guys have Node already installed on your computers, which you should. So we'll say CRA intro.
And is Is there any way to reduce the bloat of standard React app? Because Hello World is like 170 megabytes for 100 for Hello World.
Well, the bloat is happening in your node modules folder, right? So no, not really.
No, there's no modules. Like
Now, I will say this. So, like later on, when you're done with your assignments, and/or when you're uploading them to the platform, you can go ahead and delete your node modules folder. There's no harm in that because you can always recreate that folder if you ever need to.
Plus, you wouldn't use this. You wouldn't use React.
Oh,
Well, true. Yeah. I mean, if it was something that was simple,
You use it for more complex apps.
Yeah, with the assignment, I tell the ask this to do that.
Oh yeah.
100%.
So we just to upload the SRC file.
source file.
Yeah.
Well, it's not just going to be one file. You'll potentially have other files with different components, right?
Well, I mean, like the one we changed only testing. At least.
Well, I just ended up making it to GitHub because it's like the GitHub pushes are so much faster than uploading.
Yeah, you could do that too.
It's so much faster.
Yeah.
I was waiting for like 5 minutes and it was done.
All right. So finally, we've sort of scaffolded this create React app, right? Okay. And now to actually work in this, what I want to do is I want to code CRA intro. So let's open that up in our VS Code. Okay, cool. So let's just kind of glance around and see what we've got here. So we've got this node modules folder, and as Albert mentioned, this is going to be quite a big one. So watch out for this. If I open this up, look at all this stuff that has been installed. Okay. What's that? So let's talk for a second about what Create React even is. You know, like why are we using this thing? Well, the reason why we're using it is because it has a number of nice presets, and built in, it creates a very nice developer experience. Now, you could scaffold your own React project. It's not too terribly difficult. It's just the way that this one is set up, it's very nice for people to get started with React. Okay. So it gives us a lot of good presets. It does install a lot of things, but generally, anytime we install libraries in our projects, that node modules folder is going to start to get big. The reason why is because every dependency that we install may have dependencies of its own. Okay, so if I install one thing that has 5 other dependencies, you know, how many dependencies do I have now in my project, really? I've got 6 plus whatever sub-dependencies that other one has, what those other ones have. So yeah, you might see images online about the node modules folder, likening it to a black hole. You know, like the size of your project is this, and you'll see this black hole with node modules down at the bottom. So they can become quite large. And that's why you'll see this git ignore file. It's going to include that node modules folder because you never want that to be part of your repository. Imagine how big your repository would get if you were including node modules in it.
So if I pushed it to GitHub and then I deleted the project on my actual hard drive, if I want to pull it from GitHub, how would the repository, how would that work?
You could clone it at that point. Yeah.
You said the no modules are ignored when you push to GitHub.
Right. So then what you would do is you'd come into your terminal after you've cloned it, and you would say npm install.
Oh, okay.
And what that's going to do is it's going to look inside of our package.json file. We'll take a look at that as well. It's going to see what are all the dependencies that we need, and it will install those for you. Yeah. Yeah, so here inside of our package.json, like I said, is some basic information about our application. We've got the name of the project, the version. We also have the dependencies, okay? So notice how it doesn't seem like there are really that many here, right? I'm only seeing 6 different dependencies. So why is that node modules folder so huge?
It's black hole. Is every one of them?
Because it's like this recursive situation, right? Each one of these 6 dependencies probably has a bunch of dependencies of its own. And then each dependency of those dependencies has dependencies as well. right? So that's why it can get pretty big. Then we have this little scripts object here, which enables me to run some different things. So if I say npm run build, for instance, it's going to run this command right here. Okay? Or if I say npm run eject, it's going to run this guy right here, React scripts eject. You guys might be wondering what eject means. It basically means I want to make this no longer a create React app anymore. So I've taken sort of all I can get from create React app. Now I want to have more control over the project. So it gives you more control, but usually you guys aren't going to want to eject unless you really know what you're doing. Okay, because it's a one-way street. Once you've ejected, you can't go back. Yeah. So that's that. Question.
What does
Bob.
create React app provide that you wouldn't have if you did it?
Well, for one, it gives you linting out of the box, which is kind of nice. So it gives you some code quality checks. Now, again, you could do this stuff manually on your own if you needed to. It also gives you hot reloading, which is extremely important. And that's another thing that you could set up on your own. But here, it's just set up for you with no, like, you don't even have to think about it. It's all ready to go. So yeah. If you guys become a bit more advanced in React, you may want to learn a little bit more about Webpack. And it's this tool that we use to bundle up our code. Okay? But for now, I don't want you guys to worry about sort of the nuts and bolts of that. I just want you to know kind of how can we create things in React. Okay. Then we have some browsers lists here. Basically, that's saying which browsers do we want to support. So greater than 0.2%, not dead, not Opera Mini at all, I guess. Down with Opera, right? All right, so that's our package.json. We also have this public folder. Okay, and inside the public folder, you guys will notice that we have an index.html. Well, let's take a quick look at that. If we scroll down, this looks pretty familiar, right? We've got a div with an ID of root. What do we think that's for? What?
I think the app.js file references that.
That's where we're going to mount everything to, right? That's like our mount point. Okay. And then these other files that are inside the public folder, we've got like a favicon, a couple logos. We'll see those in a second. There's even a robots.txt. That's the robots.txt is more for SEO kind of stuff. So don't worry about that.
What's SEO?
Search engine optimization.
Okay.
Yeah. All right, so let me collapse that. Let's look inside of our source folder. And then in here, we've got some different things. So we've got our index.js. Now what are we doing here? We're importing React and we're importing React DOM. This is just like in the other, in my HTML file. Remember I was pulling in those scripts? It was like react.development.js. So here we're just importing them, but they're actually coming from our node modules folder this time. Okay. Now the other thing that we're doing here is we're importing a CSS file. We're not going to worry too much about that, but that's just for styling, obviously. And then we're importing this thing called app. This syntax looks kind of familiar, right? We were doing a little bit of this yesterday. So if I see what's inside my app.js, same thing. I've imported React, right? And then I imported some things I want. So I want a logo and I want my app.css. I'm just going to simplify some of this a little bit so that we don't have all of this extra stuff. And let's just render out an h1 tag. Oops. Okay, hello from create React app. Now this looks a little bit better and easier to deal with, right? Okay, this is what we're calling JSX. So what it is it's a JavaScript syntax extension. Okay? So we can write things that have regular JavaScript in them, but also use this JSX as well to kind of give us that HTML-like feel. All right? And you can see the export default app. That means that that's what we're exporting from this file. So let's go ahead and run this real quick. If I open up my terminal here, I can say npm start. Okay, and it opens up this nice little development server for me here. That might take a little bit of time. Okay, there we go. Hello from Create React App. Now watch this. If I change this text at any point and save it, boom. Did I even refresh my page? So that's what I mean when I'm talking about hot reloading. It's just happening like that, without me really doing anything other than just saving the file. Pretty sweet, right? Yeah. Okay, cool. So this is as simple as it gets. We just have this app function, and all we're doing is we're returning some JSX that kind of looks like HTML, right? What if I wanted to create an actual component, like some reusable block of code that I can kind of use in different places in my application? For that, what we can do inside this source folder is we can create a folder for our components. And now I'm just going to create a, we'll call it a list component. All right. And now every time I'm going to create some sort of a React component, I need to import React as well. This is extremely important. So at the top of all your component files, make sure that you're saying import React from React. So like that. Okay. Now I'm just going to create a function. So let's say function list, like that, and then we'll export that by default. All right. Now, what do we think that our list is going to take in? I've been hearing this sort of props idea thrown around. Some of you guys have been doing some of your reading. That's good. So when we create a list, we're going to take in one argument called props. And what you can think of this as is like, what are going to be the options for my list? So if I had a list, what do you think I might want to be part of this props object? Maybe, yeah, maybe I want to allow a user to specify how do I want this list to look in some way, right? That could be.
Are we assuming like styling is still going to be the CSS file, or are we going to put styling as the props?
Kind of up to you. I mean, I can show you guys some styling stuff, but really I want this to be more about the structure rather than the style right now. Yeah. But if I'm creating a list, don't I need to have some sort of an array that I'm taking in so that I can kind of iterate through it, right? Okay. So let's see how we can do this. Inside this function, what I'm going to do is I'm going to return, and you'll see these parentheses again. The reason why I'm using parentheses is because our JSX is going to have more than one line inside of it. If it wasn't, I could simply exclude the parentheses and just return out whatever it was I wanted. Okay. So I'm going to say inside here, let's render a div. Okay, and then inside that div, I'm going to have a h3 tag. And then inside that h3 tag, I want to have maybe a name for the list. Okay? So if I want to include something that I'm taking from my props object, I'm going to use curly braces. Okay, this should look really familiar to you, like slightly different. How did we output something in the template in Python? Double curlies, right? So yeah, we would do something like this. This time we're just going to use single curlies. so it's not really too terribly different. I'm just going to say single curly braces, and we'll say props.title. So this is like the title for our list, right? Cool. All right, then under here, I'm going to create a UL element. And then inside of that, what I want to have is I want to iterate through all of my list items. Okay? You guys remember how we were talking about iterating yesterday in the afternoon? Okay, so yeah, you might think, let's do it as a for each. But actually, the problem with for each is that it just runs a function against every element. It doesn't actually transform that element in a particular way. Now, I want to transform each one of my list elements because it's just going to be like an array of strings. I want to transform them into an li tag with that string inside of it, right? So that it actually looks like HTML. So here's how I'm going to do that. I'm going to use, again, my curly braces. Only this time, I'm going to say props.items.map. All right? So what I'm saying here is this props object, I'm deciding that I want to take in an items array that I'll be able to map through. Okay? I haven't done it yet. All I've done is I've called map, but I need to provide map with what? Do you guys remember?
That's not arrow function.
What does map need? Yeah, maybe an arrow function, right? It needs a callback function. We have to say, what do we want to do to each element? How do we want to transform it? Okay. So let's say we're going to get an item. And then what I want to return, notice how I have this arrow here. The arrow is saying, I'm just going to return this because I haven't opened up a function body with a curly brace, right? So it's saying, I'm going to return everything that's inside this set of parentheses. And I'm going to put li. Inside that li, what do I want to output there? The item, right? So I've got this variable here that's representing each item in the list. So let me just output it right there in between those curly braces. So say item like that. Okay. Good. So it looks like our component is pretty much done, right? What we've done is we've established this reusable thing that I can create one list over here that has one title and items, and then I can create another one that has totally different title and different items, right? So it is a function. Quite nice to use. So now that I've exported that here, how can we use it from within our app.js? I've got to import it, right? Okay, so the path is going to be something like this. I'll say import list from, and then we'll say dot slash, which means our current directory, right? And then we'll go into components and then / list. Okay? So now that I've imported this list, I should be able to actually use it down here. So let's say this is how we output a React element. That looks like HTML, doesn't it? Only notice the casing, because it starts with a capital, we know that it's some kind of a React element. It's not just a native HTML element. Okay. Notice how I have some red under there, right? What's going on there? What's happening is when we render something, we have to have only one parent element. Now, in our case, we don't have any parent elements, right? I've just got these two siblings right here. There's nothing that's surrounding them. So there are two solutions to this. Either I can wrap this. So if I go wrap with abbreviation, I could wrap it with a div, right? Or if I don't want to add more divs to my page, I could instead use these little fragments here. So that way we have one parent, but the parent's not really an actual HTML element, right? So sometimes we have these situations where it's like div and then a nested div and another nested div. I'm just kind of trying to avoid that. Okay. Okay. Now, what do we need to provide our list with? We said that it's going to take in some information, right? Let's look back at it. So there are a couple things that I'm trying to use. I'm trying to use a title right here, and I'm also trying to use items. So I better provide those when I create this thing, right? So let's go inside our app.js, and I'm just going to create an array here. So we'll say const fruits equals a list here, bananas, oranges, peaches, pears. All right, cool. So I've got my array. Now, when I want to pass that along to my list, let's say my list is going to have this title, right? Title equals fruits, or we'll do it in capital there. And then the other thing is items equals items. So let's look at this carefully. So in the first case, when I was passing along the title, I can do it just as a string, right? Because it's hard-coded, because I already know what the value of that thing is. In the case of the items, are we hard-coding that, or are we taking that from a variable? We're taking it from a variable, right? Which means that it's a JavaScript expression. Whenever you guys are passing along JavaScript expressions to some other component, you have to use the curly braces like that. Okay? All right, so let's save this and let's go back and let's see if we're getting items is not defined. Oops. Oh, whoa. It's called fruits, yeah.
Yeah.
Hello. And notice here how we're actually getting the errors down here, right? So that's pretty helpful. All right, fruits. Let's go back and let's see what we got. Cool. We've iterated through our fruits. Now, let me show you one other thing here down below. If we go here, it's giving us some kind of a warning here. It's saying each child in a list should have a unique key prop. Okay? So anytime that we iterate through some kind of an array, we need to give each item a unique key. Well, in some cases, I may have a nice ID to use already. Like, what if I was taking something from a database? Well, those will already have IDs. But in our case, we don't really have sort of a unique identifier for each one of these things. So there's kind of a fallback for this. And the people behind React don't necessarily advise you to use this, but you can use it if you need to. When we were doing our map function, we also had access to the index of each item as well. So I can also use this I and use that as a key. So I'm going to have keys of 0, 1, 2, 3. I think we had 4 elements, so 0, 1, 2, 3, yes.
Is there a way to concatenate the key according to the index? So instead of like bananas is 1 or 2 or whatever the number is, I could say fruit 1, fruit 2, and assign that to be the key.
Sure. Yeah, we could do that. So let's say right here on the li element, I'm going to say key equals, and then here, because this is going to be a JavaScript expression, I'm going to put it inside the curly braces, right? So I'm going to say the string fruit, I'll put a dash just for fun, and then we'll concatenate on that index. So it'd be fruit dash and then whatever the index was on there. So let's save that. Let's go back here. And now we're not getting any warnings in the console, right? I mean, there are some warnings, but it's not really because of that. Here we've got a logo is defined but never used. So if I go back into my app.js, we're not using this logo, so I can just comment it out. And then that goes away. Okay? So that's us iterating through a list. One other thing I want to show you is what if I want to set up a situation where if I click on a single fruit, it logs out what fruit was clicked on? Okay. So how could we do that? Well, for our list component here, I can add what's called a synthetic event. Remember how we added event listeners in vanilla JavaScript? So we'd say add event listener, then we put click, and then we do our callback function. So here I can just say on click. Notice the casing there, it's in camel case. And now I need to provide it some kind of a callback function. Okay? So I'm just going to do a little anonymous one inside here. And actually I'm gonna break this up so it's a little more readable. Okay. So I've got my callback function ready to go. Now in here, I want to say console.log, and then I'll just say the fruit you clicked is, and then I'll just concatenate onto that the item, right? Or actually, let's say item you clicked, because just in case, what if we wanted to render some non-fruits, right? We want to make it a little more flexible. So that's what we got right there. That's how we can respond to a click on one of these individual items inside the list. So let's save it, and let's go back and let's try to click on these guys. The item you clicked is oranges. The item you clicked is bananas. The item you clicked is peaches, right? So it's working as expected. All right. So let's read through this a little bit because there's a lot going on. All right, real quick, I'm going to have somebody blow through this index.js. Erica, take me through this.
We're gonna import React from React.
Okay, and that's coming from where exactly? Where did we say we're getting it? We're getting it from that node modules folder. So if we were to actually open up node modules and scroll way down, because we got a lot of stuff in there. Where is it? There it is. That's where React's coming from. Okay, cool. Go ahead.
Also import React DOM.
Mm-hmm.
Comes from the node.
And React DOM is for what again?
The HTML.
It's for rendering our application, right? So we want to actually render it in the HTML. All right, cool. Keep going.
Import in the current folder index.css,
Mm-hmm.
which is importing that folder.
Well, it's not importing a folder. It's just importing a file. Index.css, yeah. All right.
Import app from app.
Good. And what was app again? So if we look back at this, let's take a quick look and see what we're importing. A function is what we're importing. Good. All right.
And import all as service worker from current file service.
Yeah, we're not going to worry about that. In fact, I'll just comment it out. So, oh, geez, but it doesn't like that. All right. Don't worry about what service workers are doing. We're not really going to cover that. Okay. All right. Go ahead down to this line, line 7.
React DOM.render, that's where we're connecting our app to our HTML div root.
Yeah, so here we're saying we're going to render this element, which is that function app, and we're going to render it here. So we're getting that root element by ID. Good. And then, again, we won't worry about the service worker register. So let's go into our app here. And Greg, tell me what's going. Oh, good. Perfect timing.
If you have 10 functions, you have to import 10 of them, or you just can like use the same as the Python and put the star, and like it's gonna read all of them.
Yeah, you could use the star.
So,
That would work. Yep. Good question. All right. So let's do lines 1 through 5, Greg.
so we importing the React from React, the models
From the node modules, good. Yeah. Yeah, we didn't really even use this because we didn't use any classes on any of our stuff, right? Okay. Good.
We're reporting the list all of the component list.
Mm-hmm. So that's from, we're basically going to our current folder and then we're going into that components folder, right? And grabbing the list. All right, good. And I guess that's all I asked you to read, right? Okay. Line 7, Max.
Just declaring a function right here.
Good.
Declaring a constant with all our fruits.
Yes. So we created a constant variable with some fruits inside of an array. Excellent. Nick, tell me what's going on here from 15 through 23.
So we have our return statement, and then inside the parentheses, we're going to want to return that h1 of hello, and then from our list.js file, we're going to want to return the title of fruits and item of the fruits
Yeah.
in that array.
So let's think about what this is doing real quick, just so I make sure we're on the same page. Isn't this pretty much like us invoking the list function and providing it with some object, right? Inside the object, we've got a title, whoops, fruits, and then we've got our items, which is fruits. Even though we're seeing it this way and it looks like HTML, this is essentially what's going on, right? We're calling that list function with an object that has these things inside of it. So the syntax is just a little bit different. Okay? This way it looks more like HTML. And what did we call that again? This syntax that looks very HTML-ish? JSX. So that's that JavaScript extension. Okay, cool. So that's good. Let me undo that. Okay, so in the other file, in our list file, what's going on here? Geo, take me through 1 and 3 there. Okay, coming from where? Node modules, right? Good.
And then we have function called list.
Declaring a function called list that takes in what? Props. And that's that special object. Okay? Good. And then if I were reading this like JavaScript is reading it, we're not going to go inside this function, right? Because we're not calling it right here. We're going to go all the way down and do line 21. So what's that doing? So we're exporting that function from this file, right? Good. Inside here, Prativa, tell me what's going on line 4.
Since in our app.js we were passing the title and the items in those to the list, so we are getting that from the app. So by using the curly braces and constant title, we are going to print that value.
So that's being output.
Yeah.
Yeah, in much the same way that it was happening in Python with double curly braces, right? Good. And then what's happening here on line 8? That's probably the trickiest part.
Yeah, so what we are doing here is, since we want to create the list of the item, we are using the map, and also the map will take care of the creation and the iteration,
Yeah, map is going to take care of the iteration for us.
and also the creation. That's why we're using the map there and passing the item that we get from the app.js.
So what's this thing that we passed to map? I just want to make sure everyone's clear on that.
That is the item is the list of fruits.
No, we didn't pass the list of fruits to map. What did we pass to it? What's this argument that we put inside there? When I said props.items.map,
That is the value of the array. I mean, the counts fruit equals bananas, mangoes, and whatever, and item is that individual values, right?
Okay, items itself is right. You're right. It's those fruits. But when I call this map function inside the parentheses, what is the argument that I'm providing? What kind of thing is that? It's a callback function. Good. I want to make sure everyone's really clear on that, right? So we're giving something to map and saying, here, map, you go ahead and do this for me. You iterate through the list and just run this callback function for every element inside there. Okay? We're sort of handing over control in some way, right? Okay, good. And then inside this callback function, all we're rendering is the li tag, and then we're specifying a couple attributes here. So we've got this key attribute. That's to make React happy, because it doesn't like when each element inside of a list does not have a unique key. And then we're also giving it this little on-click thing. Kind of interesting. So what do you guys think that's doing under the hood? It's going to be adding an event listener on our behalf, right? But what's beautiful about this is that we don't really need to worry about cleaning up after ourselves. If at any point in time my app is no longer rendering some specific list, I don't need to remove that event listener. Who's going to do it for me? React. React. Yeah, map has nothing to do with removing the event listener. React is going to clean up when that thing is no longer on the page. Okay. Versus if I was doing this in vanilla JavaScript, well, of course, I'd have to remove that event listener whenever I was going to take that thing off the page manually. Okay. So the framework is making our lives easier in a lot of different ways, especially in the sense that we can write this stuff that looks a lot like HTML, right? Questions? Bob?
Could we declare the props within this file instead of on the app.js? With this .props?
Well, no, you wouldn't do that because wherever the function is going to be called or wherever I'm going to use this element, I want to have the flexibility of providing it whatever properties I want at that time, right? If I hard code it in this file right here, this component's no longer flexible. I want to make it so wherever I'm rendering some list, I can pass in the stuff that I need. Make sense?
Do they not use state anymore? Isn't that what the...
Well, we haven't even gotten to state yet.
But I mean, it's
That's
flexibility. You could change the state from a different point.
Yeah, but let's not talk about that today. I just don't want to
Okay,
muddy up. But I mean, we'll get to state tomorrow, though.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. Any other questions about what we did today? I know it's kind of a hard day. So let's go play some sports.